Okay, today, students, we're going to be talking about that debate over something called reparations. We're going to start with our QFD. This is a image, an illustration that was in Walter R. Vaughn's book that we'll learn about a little bit later. The caption of the illustration says, "The capital, Washington, D.C., where laws have been made and slavery endorsed for over 100 years, and where the results of Negro labor have been enjoyed without giving compensation therefor." Probably two words in here I should talk about: endorsed and compensation. Endorsed could mean sponsored or supported by. So in Washington, D.C., laws about slavery were supported for over 100 years. What does compensation mean? If you are compensated for something, it's given to you in exchange for something. If you have a job, your compensation is your paycheck. So think about how this document might help us understand a present problem and then generate a question about this document. And remember that if you can answer the question you generate here, you can have extra credit at the end of the assignment. All right, in order for us to really understand what this debate is about, we've got a couple key terms. So visit the dictionary. There's two different definitions here that will help you. Reparations: money that a country or group that loses a war pays because of the damage, injury, deaths, etc. You learned about this when you studied World War I and the Germans having to pay reparations. But more important for us is number two: something that is done or given as a way of correcting a mistake that you have made or a bad situation that you have caused. If you do something wrong, you could pay reparations or give somebody something in order to more or less apologize or correct the situation. Our second definition is pension. If any of you know somebody who is retired, they may be collecting a pension. That's an amount of money that a company or the government pays to a person who is old or sick and no longer works. Why do they give people who are older or sick a pension? All right, now it's time to understand the contemporary debate. As we remember, John Dewey in 1916 said the true starting point of history is always some present situation with its problems. We're going to now listen to an article about reparations that's being debated in the House of Representatives. What we are trying to find out is what the present situation is related to reparations. In the article, it's going to talk about something called the wealth gap. You need to find out how reparations are what some people propose to solve the problem of the wealth gap. In the article, there's an interview of Derek Hamilton. He's going to tell you why people support the policy. Mitch McConnell is going to tell you why some people oppose the policy. And after you finish reading the article, listening to the article, and have answered the two different sides, you need to tell me whether or not you support or oppose the solution that would involve the payment of reparations. And then for extra credit, if you can create your own solution, go ahead and do so here. All right, part two, time to research the related past policy case study. So in order to better understand the present, we need to know this past. We're going to talk about Senate Bill 1176, which is a bill for an act to provide pensions for freemen released from involuntary servitude and to afford aid and assistance for certain persons released, that they may be maintained in old age. Our compelling policy question: what, if anything, is owed to those who were enslaved in America? So we go to a webpage. We're going to look at this bill, and you are trying to tell me, what would it do? Section 1, that all persons released from involuntary servitude, commonly called slaves, shall be and hereby are made pensioners upon the bounty of the United States, and also such persons supporting freedmen who are unable by reason of age or disease to maintain themselves. And what is Section 1 announcing that they're going to do? What is involuntary servitude? As it says here, commonly called slaves. The people who, against their wishes, had been held in servitude, bondage, people who were enslaved, are going to be given what? By who? This is a chart showing you what reparations would be paid, or the bounty and the pension, to people. If in 1890 somebody was 7, somebody who had formerly been enslaved, they would get $500 cash, and then every month for the rest of their life they'd get $15. So if somebody was 70 years old in 1890, that's about 25 years after slavery has ended. So the person would have been 45 when slavery was ended. That person spent how many years as an enslaved human? It'd be 45. So if you were spent 45 years enslaved, you get $500 and $15 for the rest of your life. The rest of the chart explains different age groups are going to get a different bounty, and that pension is going to start smaller but grow as they get older. Somebody who is under 50, so that means they would have spent under the majority of their life enslaved, they'd get $4, increasing to 8, increasing to 12, increasing to 15. Section 3 says relations or others who may be charged with the support of aged or infirm persons released from involuntary servitude shall be entitled to and receive the monthly pension awarded to such aged or infirm persons, as long as such support is afforded in a humane and becoming manner. So if you are somebody who is taking care of the older person above who had formerly been enslaved, then you will get the pension, and you will have to use that pension to help the person. So if your parent had been enslaved, you were not born in slavery, but in this time you would be taking care of them, you'd get this money to help them. We now need to study our historic context so we could understand why this bill was being debated. As we learned before, enslaved people were first brought to the American colonies in 1619. By 1776, 20% of the colony's population were enslaved people. In 76, we declared independence. This is when we think of our country's birthday. And Vermont bans slavery in 1777. So we should all know that when our country starts, slavery is legal everywhere. When the Constitution was signed in 1789, 5 northern states had made slavery illegal. And remember, there's only 13. So the majority of states in the country allowed slavery. However, the Constitution itself had legal protections for slavery, and many businesses in the North profited from slave labor in the South. For example, a shipping company in the North who shipped things that were made of cotton, or a business that made things out of cotton, something that was dependent upon slave labor in the South, they wouldn't want to get rid of slavery because that would hurt their business. In 1861, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union to form the Confederate States of America out of fears the American government would soon make slavery illegal. If you believe that the reason that they seceded was states' rights and not slavery, I recommend you read The Cornerstone Speech by Alexander Stephens. The secession of those 11 states led to the Civil War. In 1861 and 1862, the U.S. government passed laws that allowed the U.S. Army to confiscate property, that would be enslaved people, being used to help the Confederate Army, or owned by anyone committing treason. The laws also stated that runaway slaves would be given shelter by the Army. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation freeing all slaves held in areas in rebellion. Finally, in 1865, after the Civil War ended, the 13th Amendment is ratified, making involuntary servitude illegal. So during the war, as this paragraph tells you, the government took a number of different steps that worked towards freeing enslaved people, but it wouldn't be until 1865 that slavery became officially illegal. Once these enslaved people were freed, the question for the federal government became what should be done with the freemen. Knowing the freemen would be starting their new lives with little to nothing made many thought the government should provide them some form of assistance. Just think about that. A person who had been held in bondage, their enslaver, when forced to give them up and free them, typically didn't give them a bunch of money saying, "Thanks for all the years you worked for me," or anything like that. They basically were removed from the plantation, and then it was kind of a good luck. So people like General William T. Sherman came up with ideas. He issued Special Field Orders number 15. So this was in 1865. He issued this government document which promised 40 acres of abandoned and confiscated land in South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida to freed people. Sherman also decided to loan army mules to former slaves who settled the land. You may have heard of the 40 acres and a mule. This was the idea that those enslaved persons needed something to get started, so General Sherman agreed to give them 40 acres, which they could use to farm, to grow crops, something they could use to support themselves. And then they were going to get a mule to help them. By the end of 1865, thousands of free people were evicted from the land that had been distributed through Special Field Orders number 15. President Andrew Johnson's amnesty proclamation and his presidential pardons of former Confederates gave the land back to former owners. Andrew Jackson took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. We need to find out why he thought, you need to consider why he thought giving the land back to the people who it was confiscated from was a good idea, if that meant that the former slaves were going to be kicked off the land. 2 years later, in 1867, House Speaker Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania introduced a bill, House Resolution 29, that would have given land to the formerly enslaved people. The policy would have given 40 acres to each adult male, whether the head of the family or not, and 40 acres to each widow who is the head of a family. This bill never became law. So basically, 2 years after Special Field Orders Number 15 had ended, a radical Republican in Congress said that was a good idea. We should give this land to people who had been enslaved in order to support themselves. In the late 19th century, the idea of giving pensions to ex-slaves, similar to pensions for Union veterans, developed. If soldiers who were disabled during the Civil War were paid for their years of service, why shouldn't former slaves who helped build the nation be paid for their years of forced unpaid labor? By 1899, only about 20% of the black people living in America had been born into slavery. So while the majority of African Americans in America by 1899 were not born into slavery, some considered the system of slavery to have affected their chances in life, which is why some people supported this payment of pensions to give this group of people who had been treated poorly by the government in the past a reparations, a payment to make up for that treatment. We're now going to start section 1. We need to understand and evidence why some people believe U.S. government owes something to people, those who were enslaved in America. We're going to read a poem from the chief clerk of the National Ex-Slave Association, T. Star Murphy, called Please Listen to My Plea. As we read the poem, change important pieces of the text to red. This is Professor Dickerson. He said, "Dear friends, please listen to me while I attempt to make my plea for the Negro, because he is a nation, and mankind is a brotherhood, and that by creation. The famous Declaration of Independence was passed without his request, but it entitled him to life, liberty, and pursuits of happiness. It was the Magna Charter, where daughters of America sang, and the fathers of the Republic shouted, then the old Liberty Bell rang." Thinking about this stanza, the Declaration of Independence entitled all people to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which group of people in 1776 were not given those things? If they weren't given to them then, should we give them to them now? The Star-Spangled Banner was hoisted and commanded to wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Notwithstanding all of this, the Negroes were treated rude, whipped and made to work under involuntary servitude. What is it called when you say you believe in one thing, but you do another thing? Is that a hypocrite? Here, the poem says, America's claiming to be the land of the free, but how are we actually treating people? Does that make us a hypocrite? Next stanza. I have often wondered about that painful sight, to see men and women worked as slaves in defiance of human right. They were freed by Lincoln's proclamation, that I don't deny, yet some were turned out of homes of plenty to root, hog, or die. He asks you to think about what it must have looked like to see these people whose rights were broken. Then he says here, yes, they were freed, but what happened then? They were turned out of the homes of plenty. The plantations that they helped make rich just turned them out on their own and said good luck. The universal law providing for them something they failed to get, and our government has never paid it, so we owe it yet. It may seem this was illegible, to you, but please bear in mind that those liberated should be given a compensation of some kind. So we liberated them, that's true, but we owe them something else. From the dark ages of the world, we said that all nations give an indemnity of compensation to the emancipated slaves, whereas common custom makes custom law, the universal custom makes universal law. So if all around the world, when enslaved people are freed, they give them something, doesn't that establish a custom that America should follow? For it is a poor rule that don't work but one way, and a poor government that will owe a just debt and won't pay. Therefore it is the duty of all public men occupying every station in life to help the old ex-slaves in every way possible, and give them good advice. If our government owes a debt and won't pay, is that the right thing to do, or should we do something about it? I appeal to the lawmakers of this country to take under consideration that no government can continually prosper that suffers injustice to such a large part of its population. The old ex-slaves have suffered, and they are suffering still, and praying for the passage of the ex-slave pension bill. Remember at the start of the class we talked about the idea of justice, which was the government treating everyone equally. Injustice is the opposite of justice. If a government is not treating all people equally, what should they do? So after you have read and highlighted text to red, you need to tell me what that text you highlighted means, and then tell me why that still matters for today's debate over reparations. Just complete these 2 sentences. Now we're going to look again at Vaughn's preface to his book. Nope, sorry, never mind. We're going to look at this illustration from Vaughn's book. Vaughan was an advocate for the Freedmen's Bill, and he wrote a whole book dedicated to arguing why the former slaves should be paid this pension. In the book, he included this picture, which you have seen now. So, in the picture, this illustration, what is this building in DC? That's our Capitol building. We also have our Supreme Court. These buildings supported laws that allowed slavery. Have we ever done anything to fix that? This country became wealthy, became powerful, in part because the labor of enslaved people. Were those people who helped build this country ever given something for it? Time to start section 2. Now we need to find why some people oppose the United States government paying reparations. In 1883, the Kansas Senator Preston B. Plum wrote a letter to Walter Vaughan in response to the book and the work that Walter Vaughan was doing. Since you probably can't read that handwriting, I'll put a couple quotes down here. Senator Plum said, "I am not quite prepared to agree to the pensioning of able-bodied people who are quite capable of making a living, at least until the government has fully taken care of its disabled soldiers." Able-bodied people. If you're able-bodied, you can do what you need to do. So you should be able to, on your own, make a living. So this is one reason. The second reason, if all governments are held responsible for all damages resulting from the passage and execution of laws, the unfortunate taxpayer would be constrained to sell out. Think about us as taxpayers. We contribute money that we earn through our work to the government, and then the government pays uses that money as it sees fit. If our tax money is being used to give to whatever the government says they want to spend it on, might that be unfair to the taxpayer who themselves felt they worked hard for the money? So, summarize what you turned to red and then tell me how that matters considering today's debate. We're going to look at this illustration, this drawing by Thomas Nast from 1863. Now, Thomas Nast was somebody who was opposed to slavery, and as a cartoonist, made a lot of depictions showing the wrongs of slavery. So I don't believe that he himself was against reparations, but there are some things in this illustration that might show you why some people think reparations are not needed. Emancipation, big title at top. Emancipation is the freeing of somebody. On the left, we see pictures of life under slavery. How were the enslaved people treated? Auctioned away from their families torn apart? How were they treated during bondage? Does any of this look like something that America should be proud of? Then, in the middle, we have the family now able to live together. All these opportunities to them. They can go to school, they can support themselves. How could this drawing explain why some people are not in favor of paying reparations? Think about it as over here, before emancipation, the wrongs of our nation were very visible, and that was a problem. But then what happened? The enslaved people were freed, and now everything's good, right? So if there are all these opportunities and they are no longer enslaved, is there a possible reason that people may not believe that we owe something to them? All right, time for step 2C. What did the policymakers decide to do? What were the consequences? All of the pension bills, including Vaughan's bill, never made it through Congress. In 1915, an organization filed a class action lawsuit in federal court for a little over $68 million against the U.S. Treasury. The lawsuit claimed that the sum, collected between 1862 and 1868 as a tax on cotton, was due the appellates because the cotton had produced by them and their ancestors as a result of their involuntary servitude. The Johnson v. McAdoo cotton tax lawsuit is the first documented African American reparations litigation, that means lawsuit, in the United States on the federal level. Predictably, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia denied their claim based on government immunity, and the U.S. Supreme Court on appeal sided with the lower court decision. So we have these two paragraphs discussing how reparations were fought for, but reparations were not given. Despite pushes for pensions and reparations for the former enslaved people / their descendants from the late 1800s all the way to the present day, the United States government still has not agreed to create such a program. Think about that wealth gap that was mentioned at the start during the article. If someone had been enslaved and then is released from slavery without anything to start their life, is it going to be hard for them to get a good start in life? if they do not have it easy and are not able to generate wealth, they're not going to have anything to pass down to their families. Typically, a way that wealth is passed down amongst families is property. If somebody has a job that is well paying, they can afford to buy a house, they can pass that house down to their children, and that money would help those children have a good start on life. And that would allow them to accumulate more wealth and pass it down. The formerly enslaved people were never given this opportunity to develop that kind of wealth. As a result, generations of their descendants were not given that same advantage. This is what has contributed to the wealth gap today. We're not going to make racist generalizations, but if we were just to speak on the statistics, Black communities typically suffer from poverty in greater numbers than white communities. Some people may think that this is because of the legacy of slavery and the failure to pay reparations. All right, let's make a comparison between the debate of the past and the debate of today. So what's the similarity? In both cases, we're debating what policy? Reparations, right? What was unique about the past policy debate? Who were the reparations going to be paid to in the past? The formerly enslaved and their descendants, the ones who were taking care of them, right? Who is going to get paid reparations today? That's certainly not formerly enslaved people, because they are long gone. Now it's time for you to create your policy advice. You remember how to do this? Because this is the second one that we've done. You need to first decide whether or not you support or oppose today's efforts to pay reparations. Depending upon your support or opposition, you're going to go up to the documents above. You're going to paste the paragraphs you created down here and create claims based on that evidence. After you've completed this letter, complete your rubric, and you can try to get extra credit if you would like. Remember that if you have questions, try and ask Mr. Fulbright. Good luck, everyone.